the original plan I was going to do was sort of do an hour presentation and then do an hour of Q&A. I'm sort of shifting the first half hour up front of Q&A to give people more time to log on, because I know a lot of people are coming straight out after work. So that way the maximum number of people should be able to listen to the main presentation. So, oh, great. I'm very glad to hear that. Yes, Mario Maker is wonderful. It's a great level design tool. Cool. Any more questions? Oh, Cree, that's a presentation itself. One of my favorite board games, card games. Oh my god. So we actually have a board game night in our studio every week that I am obsessed with. I started the industry with board games and card games, like I mentioned. I actually think the best way to learn game design is by messing around with board games and card games, because the iteration speed is so fast. It's like fruit fly science. So I learned game design in college, building a new board game and card game every 2 weeks. And it was extraordinarily fun. Like we designed it in 1 week, and we would play test it, and then we would change it, the rules, and we would design, and we make changes over the next week. We play test it again, and then we make a new game. I still do that. I still do weekend game jams with game designers at my studio and set them up. I have lots of side projects going for RPGs and so on. It is incredibly fun. Betrayal House of the Hill is really cool. So my favorite board games and card games, if I had to pick the ones that I play the most, one is Tyrants of the Underdark. That is Tyrants of the Underdark. It is an amazing deck builder / war game. It's incredibly simple, very easy to get people into the game. The amount of complexity of learning the game compared to the amount of depth and delight and variety, and the sense that you're playing like a war game with fighting over territory that's actually fun, and people don't just turtle forever. But people also can't cannibalize each other and kill each other very easily. It's incredibly good. It's the best deck builder I've ever played. Tyrants of the Underdark. It's a D&D themed one. The only problem with it really is that, despite the fact it's so brilliantly designed, is that because it's based around the Drow of the Underdark, it's basically a really weird theme for a lot of people, and they don't get it. They don't understand what the obsession with spider webs is and why that's a currency. And they don't understand, and they can't pronounce any of the cities. Like, you got to deal with Senvilik and Sarashini, and Akramikos and so on. If it was like just surface level D&D theme, it would be with kings and knights, it'd be great. But Tyrants of the Underdark is amazing. Highly, highly recommend. I love playing various tabletop RPGs. They're a huge amount of fun. Santorini is probably the best 1v1 abstract strategy game I've ever played. There's a $5 app if you want to try it on your phone, but I would honestly recommend just getting the board game. It's so good. I'm right now playing Pandemic Legacy out of the weekly campaign. Pandemic Legacy is the best board game experience, like, in terms of the most magical and big, that I've had in a very long time. It really feels like the next level of what RPGs want to be, like tabletop RPGs. Strong recommend on Pandemic Legacy. It's so, so good. Star Realms is a great 1v1 deck builder. Seven Wonders Duel is a really cool 1v1 game. Cthulhu Wars is a delightful and fun war game. There's so many games that I love. How about making board games in college? Did you go to game development college? No, I did not. In fact, I tried to, sort of. I went to Oregon State University and studied new media communications there, which basically meant like media that, from radio on. It was supposed to be originally that they were sort of building a game dev degree around narrative design, especially while I was there. But the moment I got there, it basically collapsed. Like, there was an internal feud with the departments and arguments about who was allowed to teach the classes and where the funds were supposed to come from. Whole degree basically collapsed. So what I did was, though, they did have one thing which was really great, which was the game lab, or the media lab as they like to call it, which was basically a library for video games. They had computers and game consoles there, and TVs for you to play on, and a library of some video games. And people could come in and try out games for their classes, or just for fun. Like, if you had a class that was studying media and it told you, hey, you need to play 6 hours of video games, or you need to check out Skyrim and see what that's like, you would go to the lab for it. So I ended up working there And it was amazingly beneficial because I got to spend like 2 years of user research effectively, just watching people play video games, from really experienced people to completely inexperienced people who would tell me they've never played a video game since Pong, and see how they engage with that. How did they encounter Portal? What things did I take for granted that they didn't have any idea how to solve? This was extraordinarily valuable. And since, the major had collapsed around me, I ended up designing my own. I'm basically saying, like, well, I got to do it myself. So I grabbed a bunch of people and I asked who wanted to work with me. And I just built an independent study around it, at first just for my own fun. And then I made it an official independent study. If you guys are at colleges, anybody, look into independent studies. You can get elective credit very often, a lot of it, by just creating a deliverable and a documented thing about making your own games and then working on them. It gets you time, it gets you credit, you get the resources of the school. It's a great time to practice and learn. And that's what I started doing. I just told the teacher, hey, I looked at the DigiPen. They make a game every 4 weeks. I'll do it in 2. And I started to, and I got 2 other students to help me with it. And we just did it. It was super fun. There was a saying in college as well, because I was doing this and so many other things, that whenever anybody asked me for help on a project, that I only had like 40 hours in a given day. So it was a lot of self-imposed work. I think 20 to 30 hours a week on top of college. But it was really fun and it was great. I mean, game design is what I like doing for fun, so it wasn't really a problem for me. All right, just about 9 more minutes till the half-hour point where I said we would start the talk. So time for a few more questions. Any of the games I made in my junior years ever make their way into the college game lab? Nope, not at all. I did play some of them with people in the lab, like the board games and card game ones, but we didn't make... Oh, wait, that's not so entirely true. So there was one video game that I made that was sort of like exploring narrative choice just with like the Twine engine, but nothing like major serious the way you're talking about it. Most of the stuff I made in college was just pure experimentation to learn things. Like I would make a card game to say like, hey, I believe that I understand something about risk versus reward psychology, and I want to test that I'm right about that with a game. So we tried it. And then we did something else that we would say like, hey, I think I figured out something about what makes Yahtzee-style games fun, and I'm going to try that out. Or I wanted to create something that's about, a board. I want to explore what cooperative games look like, and so we're going to try out one of that. Here's my theories about why it works. Here's something I've read on a game design article. I'm going to make a game to try it out and test it out. Kyle Wynn is writing up. In the future, do I want to stay in the card game design world and kind of master it, or do I want to branch out on the genre and learn that? Definitely branch out. I've actually gone into lots of different genres, and most of my examples from this talk are not going to be from card games. I'm going to talk about Hearthstone a lot because obviously I know it very well. I'm not working in, like, most of my side projects have not been card games at all. And I'm very interested in action games. I play them and I analyze them all the time. System design is completely universal. There's a lot of focus in the industry about core gameplay, and it's kind of dumb because core gameplay is not that hard to figure out compared to the system design that those core gameplay plugs into. And that is very, very cross-genre. It's why we're seeing so many RPG systems slowly creeping out and taking over other genres. There was a time when FPSs had no level ups. There was a time when shooters, everybody did the exact same thing. There was no class-based shooters or anything like that. And so those overarching systems, as we go through the game world, we're going to see that games that had very weak core gameplay, like turn-based RPGs, were forced to innovate in really strong metagame systems to make the games make sense and to make them work. And because nobody would play them for just the core gameplay. And slowly, very slowly, we're starting to see people take those innovations and move that to other genres. And to give those games a richer, deeper thing. We're seeing a lot of genre hybridization in the world right now. So I'm very thrilled to move into other genres. I think that the game designer at a certain point is like, you kind of have to really understand your core gameplay. And I've studied and played basically every game genre that there is. And I work on a lot of stuff on my side projects of various different things. But really what you want is to have a universal understanding of system design if you really want to reach the next level. And so in my career, I'm probably going to be moving more towards creative director roles eventually, and having less to do with the core moment-to-moment gameplay. That's more a lower down level thing, where a lot of game designers and senior designers work, and focusing more on the end result of the player experience, which is very easy to genre hop in. What do I have to say about game design documents? That's a good question. Not that much actually. I've very rarely have made game design documents. I think that the way they teach them in college is bad, and I think that basically somebody just sort of said it's just that they're taught a lot because they're easy to teach. Because it's so like, hey, look, here's a big document like a book report, and we'll just like have you make that, and then you learned game design. Most game design is extraordinarily iterative. Like design documents have to be updated constantly. Nobody wants to read a 60-page game design document to answer a question. It's much better to do short, small design briefs in most situations. And if your thing starts getting 30 pages long, unless it's like incredibly focused around one role for the execution of like a feature, something that can live very easily in a document, like wireframes for a tool, images of what a screens are supposed to look like, it's not that useful. Most of my work has been relatively small teams or small pods within teams, just communicating with each other constantly and playing the game constantly, and then trying to make it better than it was the day before. So the game sort of was our living game design document. Communicating with their ideas with others, is it difficult? And as you said, do you treat feedback on balance? Feel for professional players. Professional players are very important because they shape the community's perception as well. And a lot about balance is based around perception. The way that I treat feedback in general, I'm going to talk about this a bit more in the talks. I won't go too deep now. Is that anytime a player giving you feedback is like someone going to the doctor and saying that their stomach hurts and therefore they think they have cancer. They're probably wrong about the cancer. They probably just looked it up and read it online. But that doesn't change the fact that their stomach hurts. Feedback always comes from a genuine place, but players will often jump to a solution that often is wrong. And so your goal as a designer is to listen to their feelings and try to solve their problem for them. It's not to say, oh, your idea was dumb, therefore I'm going to ignore your feedback entirely. Communicating ideas with others is difficult. Yeah, actually, communication is one of the most important things a designer can do, especially in a large team setting. There's a really good book that I read recently called The Storytelling of Design or something like that. I can look at this up exactly if you PM me later and find it for you. Basically, its value was just trying to explain designs through story and through story medium techniques like presentations and so on. It was extraordinarily valuable because my biggest issue as a designer is twofold. First, to make sure that I'm communicating my designs effectively to the end result people so that they know what I'm doing with. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, about some techniques you can have for that. But the second is you have to sell people on your designs. Design is very subjective, and a lot of the things that I know matter extraordinarily deeply are very hard to explain to other people that they matter. Like, it's very hard to explain, look, your idea is cool, but it's going to require like 3 whole clicks to do it. And it's going to feel heavy, and it's going to make the game 5% more confusing. And if we keep, we have to shave those little 5% whenever we can, because if we shave them everywhere we can, we're going to avoid feature creep, and we're going to get to a smooth, elegant experience. And yeah, it's not going to take that long to implement, but it's going to take long to get it polished and all these things. Whereas my solution is, look, we did this. This thing is amazing because I can already see how it's going to look like in the game. I can sort of see the machine working, and I have to communicate to you that it's good and why it's good and why players will care. Very important in a company like EA as well, which is a little bit more corporate than some, that I have to explain, yes, this is something that players will value and will make them excited about it. And it's my job to know that, and it's not their job to know that, but it's their job to decide if my idea is good. So I need to be very strong about communicating like why this is cool and why this is exciting. Over the last 2 years, I've mostly just practiced giving really good presentations and building PowerPoint presentations to communicate great ideas. I was recently very happy with one metaphor I used where I was basically saying that the value of like this feature that I was pitching was very big and it was very scary, because I was talking about something that required a lot of handcrafted attention, and I ended up saying like, and if you imagine using it on a broad system, it would be very scary. So I'm saying like, handcrafted content is the cherry on top of this system. And I showed a picture of a sundae, and I labeled the cherry as like handcrafted and the other parts as like procedural and so on. And that was like a very useful metaphor for people saying, oh, okay, it's delightful and it makes it better, but it's not most of it. And that just relaxed people a lot. And so finding little simple ways of communicating the feel and why things are exciting or why things shouldn't be worrying is super valuable. Communication is essential for designers, because, and also, by the way, you have to earn people's trust as well. So being able to speak to their concerns and to build their comfort and listen to their feedback is super valuable. All right, I think I'm going to jump into the talk now because we've reached 6:30. Okay, so grab a quick swig of water. 1 second. All right, so apologies to anybody who's heard this already, but I'm just going to get started. So my name is Dan Felder. I'm a senior game designer with EA, and I'm working currently on a undisclosed project that I can't talk about. I'm from the studio Capital Games in Sacramento, which makes the hit mobile game Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And I previously was at Blizzard Entertainment working as initial designer on Hearthstone. Initial designer doesn't mean I was there when the game started. What it means is that whenever we made expansions, the initial designers were the first people on the set and the last people off. We came up with the ideas for the set's themes, the core mechanics, designed the first draft of every card, and the second and third draft because you go through so many iterations. We play tested it daily. We wrote the names of the cards, wrote the art requests for the cards, wrote the voice lines and jokes on the flavor text for the cards, went to the voice acting studios to make sure that it was recorded in the ways that made sense for the card's feel, gave feedback on FX, really everything about design vision. And then we would hand it off to the final design team, which were the guys who would make it fun, playable, and more fun than just a few play tests. They would make it fun for like months at a time, and get the game to the final state of balance and design perfection that Blizzard is known for. So that was really fun there. And before that, I worked I entered at Fantasy Flight Games, and I worked with Abercam Entertainment on releasing Feria. So why don't we get started? The reason this presentation is called Dan Felder's Design Toolbox is because, one, I'm Dan Felder, and two, I believe that every designer has a toolbox, a series of ideas, concepts, mechanics, things that make a lot of sense to them, that are extraordinarily valuable, and they return to time and time again. So yes, we do. If you don't see a PowerPoint, I should be sharing one live in the event voice channel. Hopefully someone in the text chat can tell you how to access it. So yes, that is correct. Do that. Do what Jonathan says. So we haven't, and yeah, we're still on the first slide, so don't worry, you haven't missed anything yet. So basically, I always like to find good tools from other people's games, other people's things, and hear what works for them and how I can apply that to me. Whenever I look at GDC talks, I'm always trying to figure out new things to add to my toolbox that I can use in new contexts. So this presentation is a list of some tools in no particular order that I keep returning to basically every week that I do game design, and I wanted to share them with you. So hopefully you find it valuable. Next slide. So we're going to talk about a scenario. This is called, we're talking about basically a game design scenario that has come up in an actual AAA game development, and we're going to ask you guys what you think. So here's our scenario, hiding the body. Two designers are working on an action game. They're having a debate. Tom, one of the designers, wants to do this. Give players the option to hide the bodies of dead guards. Basically, this is very simple concept. You're going through a facility with guards, you're shooting them, you're killing them, and basically you'd have the option to grab the bodies of guards and hide them, drag them to closets, around corners, so the other guards wouldn't see you coming. Tom thinks this is a cool option. However, Rachel disagrees. Rachel wants to not give players this option. The corpses cannot be moved. Okay? So my question, I guess, would be, who's right? Well, let's look at Tom's argument. Tom's argument is that hiding the body is going to make things a lot better for a lot of reasons. The first is it's going to increase the player's strategic options. That's good, obviously. Players now can just, mindlessly kill things, but they could also try to be, more stealthy and try to solve certain problems with, stealth and other problems with attack. And just, it gives more players options on how they want to approach any given problem. The games are about options. Second, it rewards paying attention to the environment. Okay, so if you want to hide the body and care about sight lines suddenly, then suddenly you're going to pay more attention to the environment. And anytime you encourage players to engage with the level design, engage with the environment, that is more opportunities for meaningful game design, and also means they spend more time, paying attention to the assets you spend so much time lovingly creating. 3, this is really fun for stealth players. Stealth players love, not just killing a bunch of guys often, but steadily working their way through methodically like a trained assassin so that they kill everybody before they even know they're there. This has built whole genres around this drive, and if they want to expand their market, which is always a good thing, right, then this would be something that would allow stealth players to play their game. 4, you know what? If you don't like it, Rachel, you and other players can ignore it. The whole point is it's an option. We're just going to give players the option to hide bodies if they want, and if you don't like it, you can ignore it. It doesn't hurt anything. Rachel has some other ideas. Rachel's argument is we should not give players the option to do this. No choice. And here are her reasons. Look, at first it takes resources to implement, meaning less time to polish the other gameplay. Anytime you add anything to your game, imagine it taking a certain amount of your budget, your time budget, your energy budget, your complexity budget, whatever that budget is. And every time you add something to the game, well, that means you have less time to spend on other things. If you're going to spend 4 weeks adding this system to the game, that's 4 weeks less to spend time polishing your other more important systems. Of course, Tom might not think that there are more important systems and it's worth the bang for the buck, but Rachel seems to not really care. 2, players might get confused, thinking they have to hide bodies when they don't. If the point is, you don't need to care about this feature, why is it here? And players that don't want to do it will think they have to. Players that do want to do it might think it's not important. It's just there's opportunities for player confusion here, and confusion is bad. 3, you know what? Stealth players can just play a different game. Not every game needs to appeal to everyone. Who cares? Our game's not about stealth right now. We can try to make it about stealth, but let's just do one thing well. So, the interesting thing about this is a question, who's right? This is the type of thing I deal with all the time. We have multiple different people that have interesting opinions. They make good arguments. Who do you think is right in the situation? I'll open to suggestions in the chat. Give you guys about a few minutes to start typing some ideas. Cowards. Neither, both. Rach, okay. Question, design resources. Cool. 2 for Rachel. Sounds like producer arguing with the designer. Not entirely wrong. Pragmatism wins. Depends is my answer. So with Rachel, budget isn't as negotiable as who will play it. All right, got a lot of Rachels over here. This is actually really interesting. A lot of times when I propose this scenario, people often side with Tom because more options is better. Dr. Gore, run market tests, then let them decide. That is often a very common response, but it's very expensive to build both features and then test them and then remove them. It kind of defeats the purpose of simply adding the feature in the first place. There is, however, you can do very quick, cheap prototyping to get the general idea in place. And that wouldn't be a market test, but it could be an internal player test. So it is always better to try stuff out first if you can get it up really cheaply. Cordy is the pillars of the game. All right, cool. So got a lot of good thinking responses here. So I'm going to tell you guys, this was a discussion from a AAA game that was very popular, and I'll tell you who won. So first, let's tell you about who the game is. Wolfenstein 3D. Now, you can probably guess just from the picture where they ended up going with this. Wolfenstein 3D was one of the first-person shooters, and it was the precursor to Doom by id Software. Doom, of course, was such a major success in the market that the phrase Doom clone replaced the term first-person shooter for a very long time. First-person shooter becoming a genre was just, for a while, they were all just called Doom clones. So Wolfenstein 3D was all about blasting through enemies and being like a truly Rambo-esque badass. So let's look at what John Romero did, because the thing is, they added this system to Wolfenstein. Wolfenstein 3D was based off of a game called Wolfenstein, and Wolfenstein had the system where you could kill guards, search their bodies, and then hide them if you wanted. And so they put it in. But after testing it, they took it out. They just hated how it killed their momentum. And John Romero said this: anything that's going to stop us from mowing shit down, get rid of it. John Romero. So basically, their game was all about push forward combat. They want to be charging down halls, maximum speed, shooting their enemies, and just blowing everything away. And every time they wanted to hide a body, that killed their momentum. That literally, you had to stop. You had to go backwards to drag bodies behind things. It was not the spirit of their game at all. So in this case, Rachel was right. Rachel was John Romero. However, there's another game. After id Software, John Romero left to start Ion Storm. And Ion Storm made two major games people are familiar with. First, Daikatana was a disaster, but also another designer named Warren Spector made Deus Ex there. Now, Deus Ex had very little to do with John Romero and had a very different ethos. Deus Ex was all about meaningful choices. You were a secret agent in the future making a series of meaningful narrative and gameplay and progression and character building choices, as well as moral choices that would impact the world significantly, and they would matter. So Warren Spector was similar of resources to what they had this design goal. If we got compared to the single purpose games, we'd get crushed. But if people got what they could play however they wanted, we'd rule the world. Because Deus Ex was all about meaningful choices. The extreme version of this quote, the extended version of this quote, because he's talking really about what his trepidation before the reviews started coming in, was that Deus Ex had gunplay that was worse than dedicated shooters. It had RPG systems that were less deep and rich than dedicated RPGs. It had stealth that was worse than stealth games. And the graphics were basically worse than even things at the time. But their game was all about meaningful choices and making the players' choices matter. And if they did that, they'd rule the world. Deus Ex was called out one of the best games of all time. Despite the terrible graphics and the weird controls, it still holds up to this day. If it's on, just pick it up, guys. Try it out if you haven't before. The first level alone is gorgeous. So, what's interesting there is this. You cannot answer any question about your game until you know your design goals. Me. I say this all the time. Now, a lot of people are saying it depends in the chat and so on, because I think intuitively or explicitly, they understand this as well. You cannot answer any question about your game until you know your design goals. The funny thing, though, is I have lost track of how many times we sort of slip into what I call player mentality, because we're all fans of games. We all play games, and we often have systems or gut reactions to things that are our player type that we love. But we have to step back and remember we are building something that is not just for us, unless that is what you're doing. We are building something for our player to fulfill our creative design goals. And it's very easy to lose track of what the point of this feature, this system, this ability is, and to sort of slurp things up from other things that are fun in different contexts. Like, it's very easy for somebody to say, like, hey, I love meaningful narrative gaming, and I want to put that into my game. But also I want to have fast, immediate, like bloody combat, and because I like that in this other game. I'm just going to mix them together. And they often don't go together, because often one ends up killing the other. And you get the delightful ludonarrative dissonance. It can work, but you have some difficulties there. And so you have to constantly remember, what is our design goals, and refer to that to solve creative disputes. This results in what I call goal-driven design, which is really, to me, the only sensible way to do it. The other option is to say, we are going to make stuff because it feels intuitive, or it makes sense to us intuitively that we would do it, or I feel really good about this decision. Intuitive designers is where a lot of us start. And it doesn't scale very well, because when you're on a project with other people who have a different intuition or have a different idea about what good looks like, then that ends up causing some serious problems. Because how do you resolve it if you say, my gut says this is good, and they say, my gut says this is bad? Basically, that's where you get tyrant game designers, because what you really want to do at that point is to remind yourselves, okay, what goals are we dealing with here? And because of the way our brains work, often we will think we have good rationalizations for our stuff, but really we're coming back down to our gut. And so we need to constantly remind ourselves of our game's creative pillars and our design goals. The first thing you should do is establish your design goals. So let's take a look at Doom, the 2016 edition, which is inherited a lot from the philosophy of the original Doom and the original Castle Wolfenstein 3D. So the first thing you're building a design goal is you want to answer this question. What should the player experience feel like during the game? Again, what should the player experience feel like during the game? Everything you do, every piece of gameplay, every system must contribute to this, or it should get out. Everything you can cut gives you more resources to make the rest of your thing stronger. There's a great line in writing, which is every word must tell. Every word must tell. Every scene must be important to the script. If you can cut it without anybody noticing, you get rid of it. Because the more extra stuff you shove in, the more it dilutes your experience. There's also a phrase I like from card design, which was, if you have 3 cool ideas, make 3 cool cards. Don't give one card like 3 different bloated things. Same thing applies to games. If you have 3 cool ideas, make 3 cool games. What should the player experience feel like during your game? Here was Doom Eternals. This is directly from a GDC talk that I saw from them. It's really good. You are the Doom Marine, hell's worst nightmare, beating back the relentless assault of unimaginable evil. Very, very specific. Should this guy be doing stealth? No, because you're their worst nightmare, beating back the relentless assault of unimaginable evil. You should be someone who's charging in and blowing stuff up. That is your goal here. And so all the designs were designed to make this happen. But they also created some more actionable design goals, something that could apply to more figuring out how the feel of combat development work. And that got summarized this way. Make me think, make me move. They didn't want people standing behind cover and dipping out and in. They wanted people blasting through the arena and being incentivized to do that. But they also didn't want to be mindless gore. They wanted people having to be strategically thinking about their problems and saying that the enemies are a puzzle, a combat puzzle, and the environment and your weapons are your solutions. And so they wanted to reward creativity and tactics while going through blazing fast action. So their goals were always twofold. Make me think, make me move. That is actionable design goal. So what's the next step? Once you have your design goals, what do? The answer is you identify your comp, which is your comparable game. So this is how genres get created. This is how Doom clones get named. This is how Souls-like games or roguelike games get named. What is a comp? A good comp is worth 10,000 design docs. Well, now I really want to know what it is, right? Find a game with an experience as close as possible to your target experience. This actually terrifies a lot of indie game designers that I talk to. And when I was starting out, it terrified me as well. Because if I find a game that's really similar to what I want to make, then why am I making it? Or am I not creative? Or am I stealing from it? I'd rather just not even know. No, don't do that. Especially if you're working on a team. If you're working solo, maybe. I mean, you're still going to end up just copying it anyway, because instead of learning and building off of their successes, you're going to end up just redoing their homework and end up with a worse game that is also probably less creative. But the point is, if you're working on a team, you really need to, because this is your team's guide for what good looks like. It is very easy when you are working on a game to start getting used to your lack of quality, because games spend a very long time when they are not polished and they are broken, and you just become immune to them. You just become numb to all the little stuff. It just becomes used to it. And so we're having a game you can put on the shelf and say, we want to be as good as that. We want our combat to feel as responsive as that. We want our experience to feel like that. You can play that, then go back and play your game and realize it doesn't feel like that yet. So what are you going to do about it? How do you make it feel like that or make it feel better? Additionally, as I mentioned, a good comp is worth 10,000 design documents. You've heard the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a comp is worth 10,000 design docs. Design docs try to explain what the game is going to look like at the end product. If you have a similar end product, you can just tell people to play it, and then they will see all the pieces working together, and they will have the same vision. The number of times I have been in a meeting, explicitly told people everything that I thought they needed to know, and then found out later that they had a completely different understanding with what the game was actually going to be, numbers in the dozens just within the last year or two alone. This is why comps are so valuable. If your game is heavily innovative or there isn't anything directly as a comp, what you want to do is find comps for every different piece of the experience. So, for example, I have a friend right now that's working on an indie project for a sort of D&D style exploratory world game that his overall comp, he said, is kind of like Darkest Dungeon, but a totally different feel. He wants a sense of wonder and joy and exciting exploration, bigger focus on town building, grid combat, all these differences. But he wanted that he wants to capture the feel of the D&D campaigns I run for them. And so his core comp is Darkest Dungeon. Because he wants to be a guild master that recruits adventurers and then sends them on dangerous quests, plays those missions, and have those heroes grow and change over time. He loves that. And so Darkest Dungeon is kind of similar to that. But he also has a different comp for combat itself. His comp is based more on Pillars of Eternity's combat. Sorry, not Pillars of Eternity. Divinity Original Sins 2's combat. It's based on a stripped-down version of that. So that's his comp for combat. And Darkest Dungeon is his comp for town building. And he's looking still for a better comp for overworld exploration. He hasn't found one he really likes yet, but he's looking around. So that is extremely valuable for him. And you want to play this game religiously and regularly throughout development to constantly remind yourself what good looks like and to keep the feel. Finally, if it's not a key innovation, just do it how your comp does it. You have a very limited innovation budget for your game for two reasons. First, players don't like playing stuff that is really, really different than anything they've played before. You get a few people that love it. Most people freak out. People are okay with changing about 20% of their experience at a time, usually at most. But the other reason is that innovation is super expensive to do, even if people love it. Here's why. You don't know how to do it yet. You don't know what good looks like yet. So if you don't know what good looks like yet, how the heck are you going to solve this problem? The more innovative you go, the less you can stand on the shoulders of giants and learn from those who came before. I call innovation basically like exploration, because I usually phrase things early in my design sprints. Say, I'm going to do exploration on this new feature. Because I vision it like I'm going through a dark cave system looking for treasure, and I'm like exploring it, and I have to move really slowly, and I have to feel out all the things. I don't know how deep this tunnel goes. I don't know if there's anything good at the end, but I'm gonna go. But I hope. I had heard rumors there might be. My gut tells me there's gold in these hills, and so I'm gonna go exploring for it. Takes a very long time. It's very expensive because I have to start solving problems that have never been solved before. That's expensive, that's dangerous, that's risky, and if you try to do that with your entire game, you'll never get anything done. If, on the other hand, you do it with a small portion of your game, you can spend that budget in the best place possible for the player experience, because people don't really respond to too much innovation anyway. They want a certain amount, but not too much, and it's easier for your development cycle. So spend all your energy nailing your innovation, your key innovation, and then the rest of it, do you really need to redo how an inventory system works? So many games have made decent inventory systems. Could you make a better one? Maybe, but how much better? How much will it impact the player experience? Is it worth spending weeks of your life trying to redo the inventory system if you're not a dedicated UI UX designer? Or would you rather just take something that already works well enough, copy it from some other game as a comp, and just do it that way? It'll make your life a lot easier. So, if it's not a key innovation, just do it how your comp does it. The well-trod road, you should walk as long as possible so that you have more energy and time to explore the cave. So, let's move beyond our core game, though. You should be filling your toolbox. I've talked about designs and mechanics as sort of tools in my toolbox. So let's go deeper into that. You should be finding games with similar design goals outside of your core genre as well. So if my design goal is something like make me think, make me move, I want to be playing lots of games that make me think and make me move. And they don't have to be first-person shooters. They could be third-person action games. Or you know what another game that does this is? League of Legends. That makes me think and makes me move. So basically what you want to be doing is saying whenever I have a design goal, I should look at other games that have had to solve similar problems and see how they did it. Basically figure out how those games tick and how they addressed your problems. Also, I tend to start looking at other media. If I want to create a like a sense of mad science feel, like I worked on for the Boobsday project on Hearthstone, I'm looking at things like Bill Nye the Science Guy, Rick and Morty, just things that have a sense of fun, crazy, mad science. And seeing how they evolved and created that feeling even outside of games. It's a very good reference. Also, this is where a lot of really good, safe innovation comes from, because often genres, because they're sticking to comps, that's what game developers do because it makes sense, will change very little about their core game. But there are proven mechanics and systems that exist in other genres. For example, when I was working on Faria, at the time it was considered absurd for card games to have basically a player campaign where you fought AI. Hearthstone wasn't doing it. Magic the Gathering had been successful without it. People thought that it was useless. Nobody wanted it. We made a gigantic one, over 100 hours of PvE content. I pushed really hard for it, and it was beloved. It was absolutely beloved by the players. And the reason why I felt confident in doing it was because we were trying to solve some key problems, which is teaching new players, slowly getting them comfortable with our deep strategy system that looked kind of simple at first, but had amazing depth. And we wanted to give them time to figure out all their depth so they would get hooked and fall in love with the game. So similar games that had solved this problem were World of Warcraft and Warframe. Games that start off relatively simple and end up becoming incredibly deep, and you have to keep players engaged long enough to get ready to play with that big depth. And so looking at MMOs, instance MMO in the face of Warframe, or just MMO in the face of World of Warcraft, really said, well, the way they do it is they give you a lot of simple enemy opponents, give you time to get used to your abilities, slowly introduce you to them, and then they throw you into the deep end via some really big epic fights, and also give you a chance to dip your toe into PvP content along the way. And if you die in that PvP fighting, that's okay. You can go back to the safety of PvE for a while until you get your confidence up again. And so seeing that flow and that player journey and that player experience gave us a lot of confidence to say, well, this could work for card games too. There's no reason it wouldn't work for card games. Other games like Fire Emblem and strategy games have PvE campaigns. There's nothing inherently different about card games other than the fact that they get shuffled. So we knew that was really solid. We had proven innovations. We went across genres to solve our problem, pulled that in, and it was incredibly successful. And then only afterwards did things like Slay the Spire come out. And now it's like, card games and PvE, who knew? I've read so many articles about this. Works out really well. So finally, when you do all this, you end up filling your toolbox with great solutions, both for now and in the future. Can't tell you how many times I have run into design problems and just thought, hey, I remember how this other game did this, and was able to lift their ideas and then polish them and use them better. Ideas are not the currency of design. Ideas are like tools. A good game designer is like a good mechanic building a contraption, or a good engineer. You don't go forge your own nails and forge your own wrenches. You fill your toolbox with the problem at hand and put them together at like building blocks to make something new and amazing. Don't stress out about trying to come up with a brilliant original mechanic. Mix them together in something amazing. Pride yourself on your ability to identify good mechanics, not invent them. So let's talk about a new idea, the structure of fun. This is just another tool that I use all the time. Basically, I want to go through, I hear people talk about difficulty curves a lot, and I want to talk about what I use kind of instead. So let's talk about the difficulty curves. Everybody's heard about this phrase. Everybody's familiar with this idea. It's basically based on something incredibly intuitive. If games are too easy, they're boring. If games are too hard, I quit. I rage quit, in fact. Therefore, there is a line in the middle where there is an optimal amount of challenge called balanced fun. And because players get better at the game over time, the challenge needs to get harder over time. And therefore, if we do it right, we will keep an optimal level of difficulty, and players will be happy forever. So as players smoothly get better at the game, the difficulty should steadily increase a little bit at a time in a smooth, nice, happy curve. This is bad. This is really bad. And to understand why it's bad, all you have to do is actually look at some really beloved video games and see that they do not follow this. Yes, over time, they tend to get harder. But it's not a smooth curve. It's a spiky one. If you end up playing like great raid content like World of Warcraft, you will see that they're often alternating bosses, like a really hard one and then a much easier one, and then kind of a medium one, then a crazy hard one again. If you play games like Dark Souls, you will see that, these first enemies are easy and the next ones are an incredibly hard encounter and then kind of an easier one again, then an insane boss fight, then a checkpoint, and now it's easier again. That's not a smooth difficulty curve. That's a spiky one. Why? Because it's better. And the reason is simple. Contrast equals intensity. See what I did there? If you're looking at the presentation, then you'll see that this slide is contrasting in a lot of different ways. My previous slides were white. This one's black. I use complementary colors, which is all about contrast to make sure that both those words pop, contrasting each other. The white on the black contrasts with the equal sign. Contrast equals intensity. This slide probably hits your eyes way harder than most of the other slides before. And that's because our brains are wired to compare things to each other. Our brains are wired to keep us alive. Just like you notice a new smell really heavily when you first enter a room, if it has like, maybe they've been cooking something and you're like, oh God, what is that? And then after you're in that room for a little while, you don't notice it anymore. The same way that if people get sprayed by skunks, they just stop noticing it after a while, even though it's the worst thing they smelled when they first start smelling themselves after they've been sprayed by that skunk. Our brains are hardwired to keep us alive and to pay attention for differences. If we've been in an environment for a while and we haven't gotten hurt or dead, then that information isn't really that useful. Your brain has to make a lot of decisions about what to make you pay attention to and what to make you feel intensely. You know, the first time you go sit down in a chair, you're going to pay attention to that chair, but then it also has to tune it out. How much sensory information are you dealing with right now? You're dealing with the air current, the temperature, my voice, the slide, the feel of your chair beneath you, or pacing around your room. There's so many things in your room you could be looking at right now. But unless there's motion, which is contrast, something happening, it probably won't draw your eye. That is because our brains are contrast-seeking machines, and they make ourselves feel it a lot more strongly. Contrasts are the power, and that's why a smooth difficulty curve is terrible. Our brains pay attention to contrasts. Italicized, red. See, the word attention is calling your attention. This is just science. And eventually they tune them out as the new normal. This is why big contrasts intensify your experience. If you take somebody from Oregon, like my father, and you bring him down to South California, he basically dies. I remember this time when we were visiting some family in South California. I'm originally from Oregon, and I was there for a week, and they signed me up for a week of soccer camp while I was there. And my dad came out the first day, 100 degrees, or playing soccer out there, and he just like went to the coach and said, "This is child abuse. You can't. I'm a doctor. He's a dentist, but like this is child abuse. You aren't allowed. You can't be doing this." I was like, "What are you talking about? I did this as a kid. I was a kid." And after like a week, Dad's not noticing it anymore. But to an Oregonian, he's to the Pacific Northwest in Portland, where it rains all the time, the heat of Southern California blew his mind at first, and he felt that contrast incredibly intensely. This is why, for example, everybody likes to complain like, "Haha, you think this is cold?" When I grew up, it was like 10 degrees below zero, and that contrast is what creates that intensity. And so, if we want to create maximum intensity, we should continually contrast the player's experience, so their triumphs feel more triumphant, and that their failures feel more intense. Stories are built this way too. This is a structure that I took from my work in playwriting and story design. It's basically how most movies are built, and it ended up applying it to games to a lot of success. The core concept is this. You want escalating, alternating positives and negatives. This is what I call the structure of fun. If you follow the structure, your game is pretty fun. The positive incline is something good happening. Then you have a negative, which is something much worse happens, then a big positive, then a bigger negative, then a really big positive. That's the climax of your movie or the finish of your game. So it's also important that it's not one step forward, one step back. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and then 4, and then 5, and so on. So let's test this out right now. I'm going to describe 2 stories to you, or the starts of them, and tell me which one feels more interesting and more intense. Okay, the first one, yes, Minnesotans. They definitely get cold. So the first one is this. Jack is working at a company, and he gets a promotion. Then he gets a little arrogant, pisses some people off, and he gets demoted back to his old job. At that point, he is humbled, works hard again, and he gets promoted again to a manager once more, the position he was just demoted from. At that point, however, he gets sort of embroiled in corporate politics, and his mentor gets fired, and he gets demoted back to his original job. At which point he starts working harder, getting really focused, and gets promoted again to manager. The story's not going anywhere. This is 1 step forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 1 step back. Let's try another version. Jack is promoted to his job, at which point he's promoted to a manager. At which point, he starts coming across some discrepancies in accounting, and when he brings them up, he is fired. Suddenly, he's lost his job entirely. And so, realizing that there's something shady going on, he brings the attention to a journalism publication. And it turns out he's always wanted to be a journalist. So he gets actually hired as a journalist, getting a dream job instead of his dead-eyed job as an accountant, which he previously hated. And so, no offense to any accountants out there, this guy doesn't want to be one. And so now he has a dream job. But now it turns out that the company is actually framing him for the allegations in the first place. And now he might be going to jail. This is one step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. This is how good stories are built. And a game is just a story you live instead of you're being told. If you describe people what happens to you in a game, that's what a player-created story sounds like, them telling about their experience. So we want our games to create epic stories for our players to live. They're called extra lives for a reason. So let's talk about how this works in games. Good games will often create mechanics that will result in this type of structure happening. Hearthstone is an example. Hearthstone's a card game, digital card game, that basically follows a very common system in these types of games. Your turn, you take a turn, then your opponent takes a turn, then you take a turn, and then they take a turn. On your turn, this is a positive event. You get to play cards that push your game plan forward. This is your positive moment. Your opponent's turn is a negative for you. They kill your cards and play their own and deal damage to you. On your turn, you deal damage to them. On their turn, they deal damage to you, etc. So that's half the thing, but what makes it escalating? Can anybody guess where I'm going with this, where the escalation comes from in the alternating positives and negatives? Not rhetorical. Feel free to type in the chat. Drawing cards, okay. It's a huge advantage if you know Hearthstone. It's unfair if you don't. Dealing damage to the other player. Okay, but what makes it bigger? Luck of the draw? Nope, that's variance. What makes every turn bigger than the one that came before? The mana. Yes, Jonathan got it, and JJ Rowe got opportunity space increase with mana. So again, this isn't fair if you don't know how these games work, but I shall now tell you. So on turn 1, you have 1 mana. And you see those cards with those big blue numbers? That says how much they cost to play. So you can play a 1 mana card on turn 1. On turn 2, you can play 2 1 mana cards, or a 2 mana card, which is often about twice as strong. And then on turn 3, you can play a 3 mana card, or a lot of smaller cards. So you have you have 1 step forward, 1 mana, then 1 step back, then your opponent gets 1 step, then you get 2, and then you get 2, and you get 3, and then they get 3, and that is escalating, alternating positives and negatives. That is exactly what we're talking about. When Hearthstone games are going great, when you draw cards and can spend all your mana every turn, you have big swings getting bigger and bigger as the game goes on, until finally, if you win, it's a triumph, and if they win, it's an epic Greek tragedy. So that is how Hearthstone's core mechanics result in the structure of fun. I came up with the concept before I had ever played Hearthstone, before Hearthstone even come out. It was something from my playwriting days, and when I started studying it, I was like, oh my god, this is just the structure of fun. This is great. Though at that point, it was the structure of drama. Let's talk about another game that does this. Dark Souls. You can't do game design talks without mentioning Dark Souls at least 4 times. I checked, it's a rule. So this is, I think, the 4th time at this point. Dark Souls uses this as well, not in its core mechanics, which makes it harder for them. Good games will often solve as many problems as possible with the core mechanics and core systems of the game, ensuring that good stuff always happens and the designers just get to create fun stuff in the middle. Dark Souls, however, has to solve this problem with level design. Nothing about the character's inherent rules make it stronger. It is in a long term, because over the course of 60 hours, you're going to get to be more and more powerful and face bigger and more scary opponents. But in terms of the moment to moment, it's all based on the level design. Dark Souls' level design for the first few hours is some of the best in all of video games. Falls off at the end. But if you haven't ever played Dark Souls, at least buy it and fight the first gargoyles. Pay attention to level design. It's amazing. And for this, I'm going to walk through the tutorial and show you how it goes through alternating positives and negatives. So first off, we're going to start with a positive. You can check the top bar, by the way, to see whether I'm listing it as a positive and a negative. So we start in what's called the Undead Asylum. We're in a cell that's basically a prison for the undead. We are playing an undead character. People like to say the game is so hard, you die before you even start. And so as we leave our opening cell to wander the asylum, we come across our first enemies. these other zombies that are looking kind of scary, and they're in our hallway. However, they are easy. I don't think they even attack you. They're just there for you to practice your attacks on and beat them up. So you come out, you walk into this creepy hallway, you don't know what you're dealing with yet, you see some enemies, you click the attack button, you kill them pretty easily, and you're like, okay, that was good. I feel pretty strong. These enemies aren't a big deal. Positive. Negative. Moments later, you open a big set of doors and you meet the Asylum Demon. This thing is the first boss, and it is so big that your head basically goes up to its belly button. I could not find a shot of this thing that had the player in it because all you can see is like from its belly button up. You can't even see the full thing. It is a gigantic, huge, scary-looking monster with a huge demon hammer, and if it hits you, you take tons of damage. Then if you start attacking it with your broken sword, which is the weapon you start with, you just do little chips of damage to this giant screen-wide health bar. It is crazy. It is way overpowered compared to you. It is super bad, and then you die. This is the first time you die. You could argue that this is a huge, big negative, but in Dark Souls, you have to learn that dying is not that big a deal. You're going to die all the time. It's fine. That's part of it. The game's tagline is prepare to die for a reason. Dying is not a big deal. You need to just get used to it, frankly. Additionally, once you get to the next part, you're going to realize that this super crazy hard boss fight has a very easy solution that is going to make you feel better about what happened just for now. Positive, finding the way out. You're not supposed to beat the Asylum Demon. You don't need to fail on this thing repeatedly. After 1 or 2 times, maybe like at most 5 or 6 usually, unless you're really, really unfortunate, you will stumble upon the door to safety. There's a thing on the ground that says that you can, to get away, which hints that you should try to find a way out. While you're dodging and rolling around the arena, you will find a door. If you go through it, it shuts behind you, locks you away from the Asylum Demon. It's okay. The demon can't chase you. You aren't supposed to fight it right now, which also teaches you that, maybe you shouldn't try to run into every brick wall you come across. Maybe you should go explore other stuff sometimes if something feels too hard. So that's a positive. Okay, we found our way out. Now a negative and a positive are put really tight together. First, I see an undead archer in the distance that shoots arrows at me, probably dealing me some damage. Again, I'm a new player. I don't know it's there. I don't know to dodge roll necessarily, and so I probably take some damage. But I've already been taught to go to the left when facing an enemy, and there's sometimes a door there. And there's clearly a door right here, very easy to see. And in that little side area, you see some useful stuff. The starting class shield and also a better weapon. You get rid of your broken sword hilt and get an actual sword. This is a big deal. Remember this for later. Because at this point, we aren't going to really realize how much better this sword is than our current one, because we haven't fought this enemy before. So we get that stuff, got shot, we get that stuff, and we go up, we kill the enemy. This feels really good. Negative, boulder trap. As we're exploring further, we go up a set of stairs, and a big boulder, with basically no way for us to avoid it, rolls down the staircase and smashes into us. If you know what's coming, you can avoid it no problem, but if you don't, you're going to get smashed usually. It knocks you off the staircase, off over the side railing. This doesn't have a side railing because it's a different part of the game, but I couldn't find a good image of the first one that was clear there was a boulder. And so you get knocked off the side of the stairs, take a bunch of damage, the boulder rolls down, and so you're now have to walk back up around the staircase so that you can make the turn again. Like, oh, that's super bad. But however, positive. It turns out the boulder has smashed through the stone wall as it rolled past you. And as you walk back up the stairs, you see, because your camera is pointing in that direction, that there is an opening in the wall. Behind it is someone to talk to. In fact, someone you probably recognize from the opening cinematic who dropped you the key, so you know he's a friend. So you go up to talk to him, and he gives you healing potions, Estus flasks, the undead favorite. This is incredibly, incredibly useful, and you get a new good item. So the negative has immediately turned into another positive. Now we go up the staircase with our new healing potions, and we face multiple enemies. Before we dealt with one skeletal archer, now we're dealing with 2 soldiers and also another archer on top of it. So it's a harder encounter, so it's a bigger negative. And now we're dealing with a group of enemies. We take them out, though, without too much difficulty, because we're and then we get to our really big positive, revenge. Originally, the Asylum Demon towered over us. Go through the door at the top of this archway, we see that we are now towering over the Asylum Demon on a ledge far above it. And we have a new command that says plunging attack. If we jump off the ledge and attack it, by the way, this is great cinematography here. Before, we were looking up at the Asylum Demon. Low angle shot represents inferiority. Now we're looking down on the Asylum Demon, literally looking down on him. So this promotes dominance. And if we jump off the ledge and attack in the air, which is what the plunging attack is, the plunging attack gives us a big damage multiplier on our sword swing. We have a new shiny sword. Look how long it is now. And if we smash it, we're going to take out 40% or so of the demon's health bar in just one attack. This demon that we were spending minutes fighting before, just trying to get the few nicks and dimes on it for like 4 damage each. Now we're doing like 56 damage in one swing. And it's going to feel amazing. And so that is often when people like shout out like, oh my God, that's awesome. Then because of that huge advantage and your added skill, you probably fight the demon and crush it. Additionally, if you fought it a bunch previously, not having found the exit out, you've probably built a lot of skills in how this demon fights. So if you had a bigger negative early on, fighting the demon more before finding the way out, you will have a much bigger positive here because you'll probably crush it on the very first, which gives us to our super positive at the end, victory achieved. This is tied, of course, to just the dominance is the same thing. But also I want to call out, you can have a positive follow a positive if the second positive is so much bigger than the first one that the other one looks like a negative by contrast. Of course, that's very limited because there's only so many times you can go up exponentially higher. An example would be a lot of horror movies start this way with like, hey, the parents are arguing with the kids at dinner, negative. Then the parents get possessed by demons and try to kill the kid. Super negative. It's hard to go much more negative than that. So it's it's hard to go like a 10x negative every single time or a 10x positive every single time. Either way, this is an amazing opening to Dark Souls. It's super powerful, follows the event structure to a T, and it's just an extraordinarily good opening section of a game. Structure of fun. So now we're going to flip to another tool I use a lot, balancing. Balancing, I'm surprised actually how much designers think about this. I remember, it feels like dark magic to a degree. I think one reason that it is such a considered topic is that, as players, we often are dealing with tuning and balance in our experience a lot, because that is the final set of stuff to deal with as a player, and we often are caring a lot about, that weapon's too strong, this character's too weak. So as players, we tend to be trained to think about game balance a lot. Also, it kind of feels like I found dark magic, that you have no idea sort of like what balance looks like, how to achieve it, what numbers or calculations you use. You imagine there must be infinite spreadsheets, and it's really very rarely true that that's the case or that that's useful. So I'm going to talk a bit about how to balance your game good enough to do what I like to call seeing there from here. In order for you to get your game to shippable, you need to spend a lot of time tuning and balancing your game. But that happens at the end. For the first 1.5 years of development in a 2-year development cycle, you should not be doing that. It wastes time. You should be just getting the game close enough to playable that you can play it for like 2 hours and see if it's fun, if you could imagine that everything was fair. Getting close enough to see there from here. Because if it's not fun at that point, for 2 hours, it's not going to be fun for 20. And so you just want to get close enough that you can see the fun if you squint. And also, if your game is fun despite being kind of imbalanced, then it's going to be so much more fun when it is. Balance is a force multiplier. Good balance can't replace bad gameplay. It can just optimize and polish it and make it last longer. Water. So let's talk about it. The first question I run into is, I think it's really important to start with, is what's our goal here? What does good look like? What is balance? It's a tough question, but I've come up with something useful. Balance is the opposite of broken gameplay. What do I mean by that? Hence the question mark. It seems kind of unfair to define something by its opposite, because now that just moves the question. But it's very useful. So the question is, what is broken gameplay? Because my argument is that if it's not broken, it's balanced. Now, when a game is broken, is the same definition as when, a printer is broken. When it no longer prints at acceptable quality. If it prints, but the casing is chipped, it's not broken. Maybe it's a little damaged or dented, but it works. Your game is broken when your game is not delivering the experience you're designing for. That is what we're trying to avoid. We are trying to avoid broken gameplay when your game is no longer delivering the experience that you are designing for. It is not some mythical state of equality between every individual game option. That is terrible. We imagine our game as a set of scales, everything has to be in balance. No, not at all the case. We want some things to be stronger and weaker than others in order to make the machine work. Like a fuse box wants a fuse that is weaker than the stuff around it so that it will burn out without burning out the rest of the circuit. You need some things to be weak sometimes, and you need some things to be strong sometimes to create the experience you're designing for. Roguelike games, for example, often live and die around the idea that sometimes your character ends up incredibly strong with godlike abilities, and sometimes everything just doesn't work out that well. Chasing that amazing god combination is so good. I was talking to somebody recently who just was doing a Kickstarter on a sort of tactical card game, and with you sort of move heroes around and play cards and blow stuff up. And one of my friends at work knows him and suggested he talk to me because he was having some design problems. And his main question was, how do I balance my roguelike, because it's a PvE roguelike, so that, because when players are getting random cards and getting random stuff every time, I can't predict it the way I can in Constructed. And the AI is not always can't build every metagame deck. So how do I avoid some sort of combos where they get infinite creatures every now and then? And my answer was, you don't avoid it, you just make it rare. The fact that amazingly cool, overpowered things can happen is the fun of many roguelikes. You are chasing that amazing optimal thing. And that's why people play Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup and NetHack for years and years and years on end, because they have these incredible stories, and every time it feels like you're playing roulette. You're just hoping to get 777 aligned and get this amazing god run. And if you don't get it, it's challenging and fun. And if you do get it, it's delightful, and it's a story you tell. So, games are broken when they are not delivering the experience you're designing for. What this means is that balance is not so mysterious. Ultimately, balance is about design. The numbers are incidental. Let's look at a broken card that we probably should not print at Hearthstone. All too easy. 0 mana. You win the game! This card is obviously broken. Does anybody have any thoughts as to why? Time to type in the event chat, guys. 0 mana, you win the game. Means you can play it the moment you draw it, by the way. No effort, copyright strikes, there's no strategy involved, the cost benefit is off, breaks the fun structure. Yep, Trevor's using those terms I've used earlier. Too easy, not fun. Too easy to use, just the best thing to do. Yeah, so basically what we're all linking into, these are all correct answers, is that basically this card becomes so powerful it trivializes every other option in the game. And instead of having a bigger and bigger escalation over the course of the game, like the fun structure, you just have, if somebody draws it, they win. There's no interaction, there's no counterplay, there's no way to prep. It can happen on turn 1. It makes everything else irrelevant. It's really bad. It would also have, as many people would expect, probably a massive win rate. If you were to look at this deck versus other decks, you would see probably a gigantic, they would win most of the time that you played this card. Very few other classes that couldn't play it would probably win ever. So, yeah, it's obviously broken. You can't get more broken than this, except that you can. I'm going to show you another card. And here's a really important thing. Win rate is not enough. Most people think that their goal is to have every strategy or gun or character or anything in their game all result in an equal 50% win rate. That is the ideal thing they're designing for. It's not true. I'm going to show you a card that has a perfect 50% win rate, and the card is still broken. In fact, I would argue that it is more broken than the card we just saw. Thanos. Start of game, which means this effect happens before a single card is drawn or played. It just happens at the very start of the game. Flip a coin. If heads, you win. If tails, you lose. Guys, this is so balanced, right? It's a 50% win rate. If that's the goal, this will ensure it for sure that any deck that's playing with this will win exactly 50% of the time. So, is this the best, most balanced card ever? Why not? I saw someone type nope. No interplay? Okay. I like these moments for responses too, because I don't feel like I'm talking into a void anymore. Doesn't require any strategy. It also doesn't require any strategy or counterplay. Goes against the design of interaction. No fun. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. Yes, good Thanos quote. Just pure luck. Nothing can do, so it doesn't feel like you earned the win or the lose. The opponent can interact with it at all. Yes, so basically, this goes even further along the lines of breaking the game. At least with All Too Easy, sometimes nobody draws the card that instantly wins them the game. In this case, it always happens. Nobody gets to play any cards. Nobody gets to play the game at all. So this is actually more broken, even though the win rate is perfectly fair. Additionally, another concept, as Dr. Gore posted in the chat, that the delta of randomness is really wide. So what do we mean by that? That's a very important concept, which is that if you look at all the games, it might average out. But in every individual game, it's broken. So a good example of this would be like if you're playing a strategy game and a card has a 50% chance of being double the strength it should be and a 50% chance of instantly killing itself. In any given game you play it, the game will feel like distorted. That this card is either much stronger than it should be or much weaker than it should be. So it never feels fair in the game it's being played. And you just have to play lots of games on an average to feel like it's okay. So it's very important to understand the win rate is not enough. It's instructive, it's useful, but that's not your goal. Your goal is to honor what I call your game's script. Your script for what a good version of your game looks like. So what do? We match the power to the fun. We take the things that are fun in our game and we try to make those powerful so that players feel smart about doing them. Players will optimize away from fun if you give them half a chance. If you give them half a chance, they will gleefully sacrifice their fun for efficiency. The players in Destiny will gather around the loot cave that had a crazy spawn rate of high drop weapons and just shoot into a cave of enemies for hours on end. Instead of playing the more fun content, because it's the most efficient thing to do. It feels like the smart thing to do, and we play games to make the right decisions. Players in D&D will play the same build over and over again. New level 1 players will play Circle of the Moon Druids over and over again because it is so powerful they feel dumb for not doing it. And so people will optimize away from fun. So our first goal is to match the power to the fun. The things that are the most fun in our game, both to play with and to play against, should be the most powerful. And then if you want to include other things for variety that are not fun to play against, you should make them a little bit less powerful. So let's talk the next thing. We write out the script for our ideal gameplay. Like I said, we should have a script for what a really good version of our game looks like. Like if somebody was telling you, so this happened, and this happened, and this happened when I was playing your game, write that down, figure out what that overall structure looks like, and try to make sure that your game creates that reliably. That anything that breaks that script reliably is broken. Worth noting, it's fine if things break it every now and then. Variety in small doses is better than quality. But variety in small doses is better than quality. You want your game to play the same, to create the best possible experience at least 85% of the time. But if there's 10% when it goes off a little and 5% where something totally crazy happens, that keeps things interesting. So let's look at Hearthstone's script. This is just my personal conception of Hearthstone's script. I wrote this actually after I left Blizzard. This has nothing to do with anything official or internal, but I just want to tell you how I would describe it. Overall in Hearthstone, every turn is a simple puzzle. Players figure out how to most efficiently answer the threats their opponent set up last turn. The threats escalate until someone dies. And if I was going to break down the game's structure, I would say that turns 1 through 3 are set up. You basically often skip turn 1. If you're an aggro deck, you do play a small creature. On turn 2, maybe decks just activate their hero power, which is like their auto attack, and then they pass. And then turn 3, they play their first real card to set up what they're about to do. Now, some decks are more aggressive and they, start doing things on turn 1 that are really important. Some decks are more defensive and they just push things off even further. Turns 4 through 5, it can also be 3 through 5, depending on the matchup, is board control. Like, now that we've both been putting real important things onto the board, we're going to fight for them. I'm going to try to get efficient trades. I'm going to try to dominate the board with my creatures. But they're mostly pretty even trades. Now, turn 6 through 8, some of the big crazy stuff starts coming out. You start breaking symmetry. These are often where a lot of the payoff cards come from a lot of decks. They're most powerful things that are far more powerful than multiple other cards played throughout the game. That's really important because if you're playing a deck that has kind of lost momentum and needs a comeback, you need to start getting some cards that can give you a lot of variance or power and are not just purely linear. that aren't just always exactly as good as other 6 or 7 cards. You want hope that you can get your stuff, or that you can do some crazy fun things that Hearthstone's famous for. But you don't want it to happen too early in the game. If you do crazy things that alter the way the game plays on turn 2, then people often feel like this wasn't a real game. You'll get that feedback a lot. This wasn't a real game. By protecting the first 5 turns from that type of craziness, people get to play a good half of the game, or 2/3 of the game, depending on how long it's going to last, as normal Hearthstone, and then crazy stuff can happen later on. Then at turns 9+, we get game enders. This is often what control decks are built around. Many decks that are not control decks, don't have 9-cost cards or 10-cost cards, which is the highest cost. But if you do, because it is so powerful, it was worth trying to stall out the game just to play these amazing cards. And basically it says, hey, if the game has gone on this long, let's end it. Because Hearthstone has an optimal amount of time that it takes games to play. So this is where the script is working really well. And any card that breaks this is broken. If you played Hearthstone a lot, I bet that a lot of the cards that you don't like, or decks that you don't like, are ones that have broken the script in some way. Cards that have been highly variant or breaking in symmetry before turn 6, cards that have ended the game too early, or cards that have stalled the game out when the game should have been ending. So let's talk about a good balancing technique. Now that we understand what the goal of balancing is, I'm going to talk about my most common balancing technique, which I call triple tap. This basically talks about how do we get to good enough fast. So let's say I'm building an equipment for like a MOBA or something, or a card, or a gun, and it has a price. And that can be mana, that can be, cooldown, but in this case, it's gold. It costs a certain amount to buy this item. Okay? Buying this item costs 60 gold. I playtest it, thinking that I took my first shot at it by saying, hey, look, 60 gold. I'm probably going to, it probably should be, I think that, God, I don't know why I can't words right now. When I first implement the item, I think that 60 gold is probably the right price. So I playtest it, and I realize it's actually a little too powerful. I think the actual good price for this is going to be 80 gold. Okay? So here's the question. The interesting thing to do is to nerf this to 80 gold, because that's after playtesting it, I think that's the right price. I don't do this. In fact, it's actually wrong to do it. I do not move it to 80 gold, even though I think, based on my data, that it is correct to nerf it to 80 gold. I do not. I nerf it to 120 gold. This is called triple tapping. The reason is this. Let's say I nerf it to 80 gold, and it is still too strong. Before, I knew that the right number for this was somewhere above 60 gold. I might have a guess of where it is, but I know it's somewhere above 60 gold. If I nerf it to 80 gold and it's still not enough, all I know now for sure is it's also above 80 gold. I have literally infinite more numbers, infinite whole additional numbers that it could be. However, if I intentionally overshoot it by doubling the core cost and making sure I'm going to go above it, I can now establish a very strong targeting range. This is basically a concept for tank warfare. There's a phrase in tank warfare which is this. The first shot is too low, the next one better be too high, because that is how you establish your range. Now, if you're a little too strong at 60 gold and you're a lot too strong at 120, your third shot could maybe be at the correct number, which is like, say, 95. Or maybe it's even 70. But either way, it gets you that information much faster. It establishes the range much faster. And also, if 120 gold is still too cheap for various reasons or combos, you got that information so much faster than if you tiptoed up from 80 to 85 to 90 to 100. You're going to get that information way, way faster. So instead of trying to get it right the second time, get it right the third time. Shoot once, then either over buff it or over nerf it. Often I just double or halve the initial price because that's very intuitive for people to understand in gameplay to feel that effect. And then establish your points, and on the third swing, third iteration, you can get something that's close enough from almost all playtests. It's called triple tapping. Take 3 shots. Boom, boom, boom. So let's try a balance scenario. This one doesn't link to any of the things I've just been talking about necessarily. So I'm hoping that you don't feel like you have to link this back to previous ideas. Just give me your thoughts. This is from also a official FPS. So I'm not going to say which one. Basically, it's a game where they're balancing a lot of guns, all be good for different playstyles, different fun, have different RPS relationships, that this gun's better than that gun, etc. And playtesters are playing it a lot, and they're giving feedback. However, there's a problem with one of the guns. Tactical shotgun. Shotgun is a popular style of weapon, but players are in playtests are saying it is much, much, much too weak. The goal of the shotgun is basically to go in close, use it kind of like a melee weapon, blow people away from close range, be really effective from far range. And people are saying that this gun is much, much, much too weak. It's overwhelmingly negative feedback. People are calling out for buffs on the forums. And so my question is, what are some options you would investigate for patching this? Let's go to the event chat. People typing already. I'm excited. I'm narrating for people who are watching this later. Jonathan, double the damage. Okay. Increase the range. I mentioned that that's short. That's another major thing. See if the sound animation can be made better. Understand what people don't like. I mean, you're both right, but that's also a coward's answer. Increase the spread. Conclude that shotguns are dumb. Tighten the spread. Okay. I check the same scenario. Use most of the time the off chance a simple fix. Remove the thing entirely. Interesting. Often, by the way, if you can arguably remove a problem, it's the cheapest solution. It's something you should consider. Increase the fire rate. Okay. Quadruple the damage, Jonathan. All right. Thanks for the ideas, guys. So these are all legitimate things to explore. And now I want to talk about what actually happened, because they did do a patch, and people did immediately write feedback that this was fixed the problem. That the patch went out. They said thank you. The gun plays great now. It's a good option now, and everything's balanced. Thank you. You did your job. Here's what they did. They changed the sound the gun makes when it fires. I want to find out who said that in the chat, because they're right. Dr. Gore, see if the sound, animation, or game feel can be made better. So even though people were saying the gun is too weak and it needs to be stronger, all they did was change the sound the gun made when it fired. That's all they did. Didn't do any more damage, didn't do any more range, didn't do anything other than change the sound design, and that made it feel so much stronger. That is actually how they fixed their balance problem. And that is the most important thing I want to hit here. And why I keep saying it's not always about numbers, it's about feel, it's about design. Balance for perception, not reality. See, I'm using contrasts again, complementary colors. And also color language. Green means go, red means stop. At least it does in Western culture. So our goal is to balance for perception, not reality. Balance is design. It's not about numbers. We want things to feel strong. That is often only loosely correlated to the real world. Because this is the thing. Our game does... Yeah, someone in the chat typed, wow. Yes, that was my response when I saw this for the first time. And the answer is because we got a lot of things in our brain called cognitive biases. You're not supposed to read this slide. Don't even try. You can Google cognitive biases if you want to read it later. Basically, the point is to show that there is a lot of stuff going on in our brains, because our brains have to solve a lot of problems really quickly. And so in order to compensate for those problems, they create some cognitive illusions. It's like mental optical illusions. Just like our eyes are actually trying to parse a lot of information and compensate for weirdness, like our nose being in the center and it kind of blurs it out, like stuff being at different angles. And we can trick our eyes to perceiving strange things, like a painting's eyes seeming to follow us as we look at a gallery, or any number of other cool optical illusions, like two circles being looking like they're different sizes by what's near them. There are also mental illusions, because fundamentally, everything is mental in our experience in the world. And so these mental illusions are what we call cognitive biases. It is how our brain has evolved to process information and the weirdness that happens when we take shortcuts. It's basically glitches in our brain software. And it is impossible to design games without understanding how humans think and react. People often ask me, what game design book should they read? Should they read Theory of Fun? Should they read The Art of Game Design? Feel free. That's not what you're going to get value from. What I got value from was reading cognitive science books. All my original design was based on cognitive science, and I use it all the time in my work today. This was a lot more revolutionary when, 7 years ago. People are starting to realize that this is super important to every industry now, but it is still massively underapplied. Cognitive biases will tell you how humans think and how they predictably mess things up. And while lessons from a single game genre can be limited sample size or maybe not applicable, humans think the same way in every single genre. I cannot tell you how many times I have like gone from console to mobile or something, and someone's saying, "Well, will this work for mobile gamers? Will this work for console gamers?" And it's like, UI? That's a very good question. Core gameplay? Very good question. Session length? Very good question. How humans think? They're still human. Anything from cognitive science is some of the best play-tested principles and data that you will ever find, because cognitive scientists have much more rigorous standings for playtesting than we do in the game industry. Build on their shoulders of giants. Learn how humans think. Build your games around them. And the things like the sound, biasing our feeling of the impact of the item, making it feel more powerful, is really important. And that person, however, is not going to realize the sound is what's making them feel that way. They think the gun feels weak, therefore it is weak, therefore the numbers are too low. Learning this is important. Let's talk about just one. As you can see from this giant line, there's so many of them. It's broken down into 4 quadrants of the problems we're trying to solve, the guiding posts, and then all the pieces under it. We're going to pull out just one of these little sublines and talk about a very common one you might have heard of before called anchoring bias. However, it is incredibly useful and very good to game balance applicable. So you were given 2 options. This is an experiment that's run in many different ways with many different people, but the core of the original experiment, I believe, was this. You're given 2 options. You can get a free trip to Paris or a free trip to Rome. Which do you take? Most people, most times when they run the study, they get 50% who want a free trip to Paris and 50% that want a free trip to Rome. Now, good statisticians will tell you that anytime you get a 50% split like that between a population, very rarely is it because you found the exact perfect group of people where exactly half of them really want a trip to Paris and exactly half of them really want a trip to Rome. Usually when people are split 50% between 2 options, they just don't know what the answer is, that population. And so they're guessing because they have to pick one. So people aren't sure which is better. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add another third option. However, any economist that looked at this option would think that it wouldn't change any of the data because it is utterly irrelevant. Free trip to Rome minus a free meal. So basically you end up paying like, what, $40 extra for this option compared to the free trip to Rome. Now, this is relevant. In not a single study did anyone choose the third option. However, it drastically changed the options they did select. Suddenly, people overwhelmingly, over 70% of people were choosing the free trip to Rome instead of the free trip to Paris. Why? The answer is because of how our brains think, our cognitive biases. Economists like to imagine a beautiful world where we basically rate every individual choice on a series of happiness points. And basically say, a free trip to Paris. I will run my mental calculations, and I will assign it 78 happiness points. But a free trip to Rome. I will run my mental calculations and assign it 74 happiness points. I now do my calculations, and I check the highest point total, and that is the one I will select. Yeah, that doesn't happen. It's not how our brains think. This is why multiple choices start overwhelming us, because we're not looking at everyone individually and then point ranking them. We are doing comparisons. We think by comparing each option to every other option available. And when we do that, we start to see why crazy things start to happen. If you try to compare free trip to Paris to free trip to Rome, that's a hard comparison. They're different cities. They're similar enough to feel samey, but they're different enough to not really know which is better. Okay, what do we do next? Let's compare free trip to Paris to the free trip to Rome without a free meal. Just one more meal you got to pay for. That's not a very big difference in the free trip to Rome. It's not clear, again, which is better. Would you rather go to Paris for free or just pay for one meal on your free trip to Rome? Still hard. But you know what an easy comparison is? Would you rather go to Rome for free or pay for one meal? That's an easy comparison. So what our brains do with this, when given all 3 options, is we compare Paris to Rome, hard. Paris to Rome without one free meal, hard. Rome to Paris, hard. Rome to Rome but you have to pay for one meal, easy. And so our brains mentally just ding a more positive response to free trip to Rome, and we shift to that. By anchoring, the anchoring bias is all about messing with your brain via original anchor points, and so the brain cares about comparisons. Another version of this bias, which is hilarious, is that if you ask people at an auction to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number, people who write down 8s and 9s will bid much higher than people who write down 0s and 1s. just simply anchoring their brain to a totally irrelevant number, like 9s and 8s, that is basically determined at random, gives them a more high number context, and they start comparing subconsciously, they start bidding more for things. This is reproduced over and over and over again. And it also kind of links to what I've talked about when I was mentioning earlier that players don't know why they feel the way they feel. Cognitive biases are invisible to us. We think we know how we're thinking. We're not actually being influenced by this stuff. If you ask anybody in the studies which of the 3 options they chose and why, they'll start talking about the advantages of Rome. They've always wanted to see it. You ask them if they think the 3rd option influenced their choices at all. They say absolutely not. It was irrelevant. They're wrong. They got influenced and they didn't even know. Balance or perception, not reality. This is just one of the many cognitive biases you can put in your games and to use and learn them. And they're not going away. You should use them. You should use this knowledge and these powers for good rather than evil. So here's an example from Hearthstone. This is a card called Ice Rager. Ice Rager is not a very strong card. It came out in one of the earlier sets. It's basically a 3-mana 5/2. Very fair stats, no special ability. Kind of interesting if you want a guy that can maybe do a lot of damage but is a little vulnerable. It's also I don't think it was played in any single tournament competitive deck. I could be wrong about that, but it wasn't a big deal, is my point. There are many, many cards that are much, much, much stronger than Ice Rager. However, Ice Rager was called out by the community as being one of the biggest examples of power creep in the game ever. Ever. This card that was basically irrelevant to competitive play drove people crazy on the forums and Reddits and the YouTubes by seeing that this card just drove them nuts, that it was incredibly overpowered. It's a huge example of power creep. The game is going crazy. That's weird. So, why did it happen? Because of the anchoring bias. In the core set, this card exists, and someone in the chat has already called it out, Magma Rager. Magma Rager already existed in the game. It's a 3-mana 5/1. Now, Magma Rager was kind of infamous in the community because it was a terrible card. It's maybe one of the worst cards in the core set. And no matter what you do, you end up with a worse card no matter what. And so Ice Rager came out as kind of a bit of a more interesting version of the card, kind of a nice little throwaway, and still, kind of interesting to play with and a lot stronger. Literally double the health. Now, being better than the worst card in the game, most cards are better than the worst card in the game. And again, whether Magma Rager is the worst or not isn't the point. It's just, it was considered by the community to be pretty bad. So the community realized, this card is strictly better than that card. Power creep. Therefore, it is completely overpowered. This is a huge example of power creep. This is ridiculous. It caused a lot of rage. It's a perfect example of the anchoring bias. I like Magma Rager's design. I think it's interesting and fun and simple, and it makes people care about the game and the card without any words of text. That's really hard to do. Ice Rager is cool as well because it references the card, but it makes it more usable. People that have tried to make Magma Rager work might get to make Ice Rager work instead, or put both in a deck and make a more Rager-focused deck. But it caused a lot of bad feelings because of the anchoring bias. So I like Ice Rager, I like Magma Rager, but the anchoring bias created this really big swing. So when I was working on the Boomsday project, we made another card, Steel Rager. 4-mana, 5/1 with Rush. My goal with this card, our goal, was to make another card that referenced Magma Rager, but did not create the same bad feelings. So what we did was we made it cost more and have a better ability. Now, Rush means it can attack the turn it's played. And that means it's a lot better. Because the reason 1 health is so bad is that because creatures can't attack their turn they're played in Hearthstone, your opponent gets to use any simple tiny bit of damage they have to kill off Magma Rager really efficiently. Rush means that you can attack your opponent's creatures, but not their face, the turn you play it. So that meant that the 1 health was kind of irrelevant. It just turned this guy into an aggressive burn spell, and you got to get the damage on what you wanted instead of what your opponent wanted. So Steel Rager was better than Magma Rager, a lot better than Ice Rager. Still not amazing, but a cool, useful card. But the community did not complain at all about this because it was a harder comparison. Sure, it's got Rush, that's better, but it costs 1 more mana. So it's harder to directly compare. The contextual puzzle is nowhere near as clear anymore. It's more like comparing Paris to Rome minus a free meal. That is a harder comparison than Rome to Rome. So this worked out really well, and it was fun to make. So now I'm going to just give some takeaways, and I'll answer some final questions. So takeaway. 1, establish clear design goals. This is important because, as we kept coming back to throughout the rest of the talk, if you don't know what you're trying to do, the experience you're trying to create for the players, how can you have a discussion in your team about what to do and which design is better and which design is going to do that? Second, find a comp and fill your toolbox. Do research. Play lots of games. Don't be afraid that you're going to get influenced and your brain's going to get programmed. You're going to start copying some other game out there. No, don't reinvent the wheel. Optimize the wheel. The wheel was invented a lot before cars were invented, but the person who used them to make cars did something new with them. Wheels have been used on airplanes. They did something new with them. Go and research what other games are out there to find one that's close to your target experience so you and your team can remember what good looks like and can use it to solve the stuff you don't care about as much, the little systems that are not what you want to spend your time focusing on, and innovate based on that. And also, as you're doing your research, fill your toolbox with lots of information. As game designers, we're really lucky. Scientists have to read boring scientific articles to keep up with the scientific literature and to base their knowledge off what other people have accomplished. We get to play video games. I dedicate 2 hours every other night to playing video games to various genres. I try to play everything that's one game of the year. I try to play everything in my genre that's 80 plus Metacritic or higher, and everything outside of it that's 90 plus. Basically impossible, but I try it really hard. I'm lucky that I have that time, but that's how much I care about it. And if you can make any time to play video games, you should definitely do it. And yeah, someone in chat just said randomly find phone games. Yes, play them for a day. Just learn them. Another thing that's really good is to watch blind let's plays of video games. Go onto YouTube and find people playing games you've never seen them play for the first time with a webcam on. See what gets them stuck. Watch somebody play Portal for the first time and see what's confusing them and why. That's super valuable. And so find a comp, fill your toolbox. 3, build for the structure of fun. The structure of fun is alternating and escalating positives and negatives. Humans respond to contrast. Design your game to naturally produce such contrasts. Otherwise, you have to handcraft and hand edit every enemy placement. You can do it, it just takes longer. Anytime your game systems can do the heavy lifting for you and you can just focus on designing anything you think is fun, that's great. That was actually a problem in Feria, by the way. In Feria, we didn't have a natural escalation in the game, and we had to constantly make sure we were designing only powerful cards that pushed the game towards a conclusion. We couldn't make a whole bunch of other fun cards that didn't do this. Whereas in Hearthstone, which had a better core design and its core systems, it basically pushed the game towards a conclusion naturally because of the way that the amount of mana increased every single turn. In Feria, we had a flat Feria per turn resource that players could save from turn to turn. Create a lot of really fun tactical decisions on your turn, much more tactical decisions, but it didn't actually push the game towards a conclusion, so it limited the types of cards we could make powerful. We could not make ones that slowed the game down, or the games would never end. 4th, define your gameplay script. The gameplay script is a description of what a good version, a fun version of your game looks like. That's a really big deal. And anything that breaks that script is broken, so make sure that it breaks in small doses, but not reliably. Try to design your game systems, your game components, your balance, everything to reliably produce that experience. 5, rebalance everything that breaks the script. Already said it. And 6, utilize cognitive biases. That is so, so important. Here are the 3 books that I always recommend game designers read. The first one, The Gamer's Brain. This is by Celia Hodent. She is a cognitive scientist that is studying gamers and is applying it directly to the game industry. A game that she was, I believe, the lead UX designer for, or the lead UX researcher. You might have heard of. It's called Fortnite. She's worked on a lot of really big games, and I think her work is incredible. She has a great GDC talk from a few years ago you can find, I think also called The Gamer's Brain. Look up her work. It's amazing. And this book is gold. I already knew most of what was in it because it's all the cognitive science books end up start retreading a lot of the same pieces. But just seeing how well she applied it to video games, and it's so practically and so concisely, was unbelievable. It's an amazing game. The only disadvantage is that it's not on audiobooks because it's, there's too many diagrams. However, Decisive and The Undoing Project are both on audiobooks and are really fun reads. If you're only going to pick one book and that you're going to force yourself to read, I would go with Decisive. Decisive is called How to Make Better Choices in Life and Work. It sounds like a terrible self-help book. It is an immensely practical, applied science of cognitive biases informing how humans make decisions. And games are all about making decisions. That's what interaction means. So if you want to understand your own cognitive biases about what leads you to make dumb, bad decisions reliably and repeatedly, this book will make those decisions better, and it will help you understand your players. It's basically the highest value for time book I've ever read. I apply its techniques about creating ideas, how to structure meetings and concepts so that I don't get emotionally invested in them, and it's okay for me to have my ideas questioned and to lose them. I apply so much of this decision-making process to creativity to force me to consider options that I wouldn't consider otherwise. It's just super valuable, and I apply its insights to understanding my players as well. Great book. Finally, The Undoing Project. Michael Lewis is considered one of the best nonfiction writers in the English language for good reason. He also wrote Moneyball, which is another fantastic book. And The Undoing Project is all about the original invention of this cognitive science. It goes over a lot of the original findings, gives you an amazing grounding in it. And the two people it's about, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, really reshaped our entire understanding of the world. We're going to be dealing with the ripples of their research for decades and decades and decades to come. And it's a fascinating, fun read with that. Basically, these guys are geniuses beyond geniuses. It's really fun to go into it. So I highly recommend all three. Well, guys, that is the end of my talk. So I'm going to flip back to answering questions until it's time for me to go. Hope you enjoyed it, and let's take questions now. When discussing a game with a fellow designer, but the designer is not familiar with how to resolve. That's a great question. You have to get really good at describing game mechanics. You can show them gameplay videos of examples, but this is also why you do comps. You want to have comps and games you can refer to for animation, movement, mechanics, etc. So that's the main thing I would do, and that's the purpose of comps. Also, if you're building a slide deck presentation, having just videos is really useful. Like I worked with some artists that always, if they tell me, hey, we're going to use dynamic camera, I'm like, okay, I assume that's good. But then they will show me examples of games using it and games not using it, so I can feel the impact. I'm like, okay, now I get it. Do something similar. Kyron, thank you so much. That was super helpful. I'm really glad. Thank you so much. It was a great talk. Really glad as well. Okay. Yes, very cool. All happy. Okay, another question. Another example of systems built for the structure of fun that's not a card game, League of Legends. League of Legends has, as you play every game, you level up, unlocking better abilities and more powerful abilities. Which get so that your characters get stronger over time. The waves of minions get more dangerous because you break down the enemy's inhibitors, which means that more powerful minions spawn on your side. Towers get broken down, meaning that that basically you're able to get pushed further and further into enemy territory, and eventually you start turning on buffs by killing the Baron and the Dragon that make your characters giant, spiky, and strong. So between the level ups and all those other systems, League of Legends is built for the structure of fun, and most good esports are built for that as well. Another good example would be StarCraft. So, for example, you're building up your bases, you're summoning more powerful units, you're building bigger armies, and the attacks get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. It's also why if you get repeatedly Zerg rushed, people hate that, because a Zerg rush basically gives the first thing you experience in the game is a big negative, and then it's over. And that's very negative as an experience, and it happens all the time. I argue that Zerg rushes are extraordinarily important for the game because they keep you interested and tense during the opening because you don't know if you're going to get Zerg rushed. So it takes the most boring point of the game where you would otherwise just be mindlessly building your first buildings, and it adds tension and excitement even to them. So those are two more games that use the structure of fun. Literally almost every game you can do did. Fun fact, I didn't know that Dark Souls had a perfect opening for the structure of fun until I just thought, hey, I want an example that's handcrafted level design. Dark Souls is well designed. I bet Dark Souls fits this. And I just put the positives and negatives together thinking about the opening, and I'm like, yeah, that's a perfect example. It's basically everywhere, the structure of fun. Cool. Any other questions? Someone has asked if there's recording. If you guys are already watching it, and there will be one later. Another awesome talk. Thank you. Great. I'm so glad that you guys enjoyed it. I'd be happy to do talks about other stuff at some point in the future. They take a little bit of time to put together, but there's a lot of stuff I actually had to cut from this. It probably didn't feel like that because it went forever, but there's a lot that I cut from this presentation, like at least 40 slides. Any other questions? The director's cut. I'm very glad to hear. Thank you. Okay, great. Glad to hear that as well. Anybody have any questions? Because otherwise people are going to be listening to the talk hoping to get some more stuff. Reconciling game design with narrative design. Aha! This is a great question for me. I came in from narrative originally. I had a playwriting background. It's why I use the structure of fun and a lot of original early story techniques to build things. Oh, another fun example of the structure of fun was when I was building a when I was at Fantasy Flight Games, they gave me a mission like the 2 weeks before I left. I thought I'd wrapped up on my existing project. I thought I was going to chill for 2 weeks. And they said, hey, could you design an expansion mission for Star Wars Imperial Assault? Unbelievable board game. Oh, that's another pick from one of my favorite board games ever. Star Wars Imperial Assault. If you guys are trapped during this virus, you should get it. You should play it. It's amazing. Star Wars Imperial Assault. It's like an expanded narrative branching campaign. That's very light story. It's just supposed to give you missions, but it'll give you just hours of fun and a lot of these itch scratching of playing a D&D campaign with incredible tactical content. So the reason I'm bringing it up, though, is that I was really stumped for the first few days on this mission about what to do. I kept trying to add new mechanics and thinking, like, you know what? It's just adding complexity. It's not great yet. What can I do to make this special? And then I remember going back to my RPG notes about how to build good combat encounters, because basically a mission is fundamentally a combat encounter, and just said, oh, every round should bring something new, and I should do escalating, alternating positives and negatives, because that's the structure of fun. And so I built it that way, and then after the very first playtest, it just got greenlit. I'm like, yep, it's good. Let's just give you something else to do now. So something I was stressed about getting done in 2 weeks, I got done in like 4 days. So basically, just you had some enemies come in early, and then you beat them, and then there was a big ambush, and then you beat them, and then the boss guy came in, but that was just first phase 1, and you have this big, super big thing at the end. And so it worked really well, and it was a lot of fun. So that's using narrative tools in that. The larger question you have, though, Remy, is the reconciling game design with narrative design. There's a big argument that story in games are anathemas, and it's wrong. There's something I heard at Blizzard that I loved from a great game designer there about the concept of the beautiful road. The idea is that a lot of times people are playing your game either for the narrative or they're not playing it for the narrative. And if they're playing it for the narrative, like a visual novel, a Mass Effect game, then it all works out fine. But if they're not playing it for the narrative, get it out of their way. And that's kind of wrong. So the concept of the beautiful road is phenomenal in that basically saying that if you have big plants in the middle of the road, players are trying to walk down the road, and you plant all these beautiful flowers in the middle of the path. They're going to get cut in the thorns. They're going to have to go around them, and they're going to just get it's going to be a really awkward road. You're just wading through the rose bushes. On the other hand, if you plant those bushes on the sides of the road and get them out of the player's way, but it'll enrich and deepen the player's experience as they're strolling through the path. And so that creates a beautiful road for players to walk down. What you want to do is have stories that are enhancing and enriching the gameplay experience without feeling like a pop-up ad in the gameplay experience. It's something that a lot of good games that have great stories do very, very well. Or on the other hand, your design goal is all about making players care about the story. And that point, every mechanical choice you make advances the story instead. A great example of this is the Persona game series. Persona has especially Persona 5 and 3, have very strong narratives that are very linear and break a lot of rules that we've been taught about autonomy in game design. But because they're so good at tickling your curiosity and making you hate the villains, your reward for your gameplay progression is progressing the story. And so that story hook, constantly making players curious about what's going to happen next and wanting to punish villains and see them admit to their mistakes and go back into jail, ties the gameplay results, the grinding, the story, the RPG progression, to the narrative results. It becomes your method to advance the story. And often the systems tie together, like your companion relationships, how progressed you are with your social links in your party, also give you gameplay benefits with those companions. And so the social elements and the story elements and the side quests and the main quests all tie beautifully together, and it results in an incredibly addictive experience where the experiences just enrich each other. Strong recommend trying it out if you're interested. It is a little it's a little culturally different than some Western games, to put it lightly, but the game systems and the design are very strong. Okay, that person's asking a question. All right. I'm waiting bated breath. If you guys have questions, feel free to type. And if you guys are watching this presentation, no guarantee that this will be worth listening to anymore. I'm just happy to answer questions. What are some things that you value when considering joining a project, hobby on personal project? I have three candidate criteria that I use for this. Basically, there's three reasons to do something if your goal is purely to be selfish. There are three selfish reasons to do something. The first is fun. I want to do it because it sounds fun to do. It's a fun project. It's exciting. Or I just want to, jam for the weekend on. The next thing to do is money. I need money to live. Money can be exchanged for goods and services. So making money is another good reason to do something. And the final good selfish reason to do something is to learn. It's to develop your skills. It allows you to get better than you were before, to level up. So XP, gold, and core gameplay. Those are the three reasons to do things. There are so many projects and so many opportunities out there that I would never, ever join a project that isn't at least two of them. So I don't work on, unless it's literally just a pure fun experience, but even then it's very rarely working. It's certainly not a long-term thing. If I just want to blow stuff off, I'll probably just play a video game instead. So whenever I'm joining a longer-term project commitment, I always make sure that I'm nailing at least two of these things. Am I making money? Am I having fun? Am I learning stuff and getting better at things? If you're not doing two of those things, find a way to get yourself doing two of those things. So that's the most important criteria. There's many projects you could be working on. Don't settle for 1 out of 3. Settle at least for 2 out of 3, preferably 3 out of 3. The other stuff I want to say is that I want to work with people that are at my level or above. I don't want to work with people that are below my level. Now that I'm in the industry, I do mentoring all the time on side projects, but even then, there are projects that interest me and that I'm learning from. And I'll work with less experienced designers all the time. If you're just getting into the industry or at any point, you should always be trying to work with people that are better than you or as good as you. As good as you can be like you can work together with them to get better, but at least get people that are smarter than you cross-disciplinary. I was actually offered a job to be the lead designer of a game called that's actually come out in beta now called Skyweaver, which was it's basically an Ethereum-based blockchain game that is trying to make a trading card game based around blockchain where players get to own their own cards and it becomes like a commodity as well. And I was asked to be the lead designer of it. And it was by a team that is really passionate and really awesome, but they weren't as experienced in game design as me. And I wanted to work with people and work with studios that were much better than me. I wanted to have people that had 20 years of experience in the room. I wanted people that were world-class marketing and communications and data people and so on. And so, though I was offered a really cool opportunity to work with really smart engineering talent, they're brilliant at what they do, and bring the game design level, I felt that I would learn more by joining another studio that had established veterans like EA. So working for small indie people where you get to be a superstar, that's great. It's very good to stretch your muscles, especially as someone new. Don't just chase the big like EAs and Blizzards and Activisions and so on to try to join the dream job right away. Go get practice and with people that are at your level or above. At your level is fine too. Get a chance to fail in a safe environment. Learn some basic stuff like meeting deadlines and so on before you try to work with people in your dream job. That's all very valuable. So that's another very useful thing. I actually made a list following Decisive's ideas of the main reasons that I would want in my next projects or jobs. And luckily at Capital Games, it checked basically all my boxes. So that's how I made that choice. So very long answer, but it's a very important and deep question. I'll wait for another question, but while I'm waiting for it, I'll say one other useful thing for people that are interested in breaking into the game industry. The next thing I want to say is this. Treat your dream job like a quest line. A lot of people just look for any job they can get in the industry and they say, well, maybe I'll work in QA, maybe I'll work in programming and try to become a game designer later. That's fine. That's legitimate. Lots of people have done that. But what I did is I worked backwards. I said, okay, my dream job in 10 years is to be a creative director at a major game studio. So I'm going to look at some job requirements for that now, job postings for that. I know I can't meet it. I just want to see what's required. And I'm like, okay, you need 7 years of this, you need 3 years as a lead, yada, yada, okay, and I need to be expert in this and that and ship this many games. That's my quest log. So now, like any good MMO player or RPG player, I'm going to go down the list. Okay, I need this many years as a lead designer. What do lead designers need? And so I followed that all the way down throughout the prerequisites, until I hit the base level requirements for all the jobs, and I couldn't find anything lower. And their base level requirements were 2 years experience and a shipped title. And so I made it my goal to get 2 years experience and a shipped title however I could. Feria was my best chance for that. I took the job, worked very well for me. And so I've been following my career along this path to try to be fitting my quest log rather than kind of looking for any way in and then going forward. I think with our limited time in the world, it is very important to be doing two things. One, building our skills so that when we do get our shot, we'll be able to crush it. It's good to be overqualified for the first positions you get. That's how you get noticed. That's how you stand out. And two, to really just treat the dream job like a quest log so that you start taking the right positions and not meandering around and start getting pigeonholed into stuff you don't want to be pigeonholed into. Okay, it is now 8:09. Last chance for questions, or I'm just going to wrap it up. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. I'm very glad. You guys all appreciate it. See all this positive support. I had a lot of fun putting this together. And anytime you guys want to Slack me or something or ask me questions as well, feel free to do so. I love talking about game dev, and believe it or not, many people don't. When I say that, many people don't reach out to me. Like they often feel worried they're gonna, bother me or something when I ask them about it. So I'm always happy to say if I'm too busy, I can't talk right now. But if I'm not, I'll make time. Good luck, everybody. I can't wait to see your games at the end of the Game Dev Jam. And Dan out.